really it comes down to this parenting mindset, right? Because I think everything we keep talking about is really the detriment of looking at things through an all or nothing lens. Like whenever you're trying to hold all the limits everywhere, especially if you haven't been holding a ton of limits, you're going to burn out, right? But then if we burn out, then we're like, well, give up on that. So now we're back into the nothing. And so I think a lot of the struggle that we face as parents is really disrupting that cycle of swaying back and forth between this all or nothing mentality.
Hi, welcome to Securely Attached. I'm Dr. Sarah Bren, a mom of two and clinical psychologist with over a decade of experience treating patients and helping families build stronger relationships, manage big emotions, and feel more connected. On this podcast, I help parents translate the science of child development and attachment theory into practical strategies that build connection, confidence, and resilience in our kids and in ourselves. As both a therapist and a parent, I know firsthand that understanding why our children act the way they do is the key to feeling more grounded and less reactive when things get tough. And few stages test us more than the toddler years. So if you've ever found yourself thinking, why is my toddler acting like this? Or wondering whether you're doing something wrong when your child melts down or refuses to cooperate or digs into a power struggle, this episode is for you. So joining me today is Devon Kuntzman. She is a certified coach, toddler expert, and the founder of Transforming Toddlerhood. Devon's new book, also called Transforming Toddlerhood, comes out today, and it's such a compassionate, practical guide for navigating the highs and lows of this stage with so much more patience and understanding. In our conversation, Devon and I talk about what's really going on beneath these big toddler behaviors and why they're actually developmentally very normal. We explore how to set kind but firm limits that help children feel safe and secure, why punishment doesn't teach skills and what to do instead, it does, and how parents can step out of power struggles without giving up their authority. And most importantly, we talk about how your calm, confident presence is the most powerful parenting tool that you have. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Securely Attached podcast. We have Devon Kuntzman here from Transforming Toddlerhood. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yeah. So I'm super excited to dive into this conversation. We are going to talk about all things toddlers and why these early years matter so much and how parents can feel so much more grounded and patient when you are parenting toddler. But before we get into all of that, you have a book and it's coming out today. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. I actually have a copy right here. I'm just so excited for this book to finally be out in the world. I mean, not only have I worked on it for a couple of years to get it out into the world, so, it's just a big milestone for me personally, but I know this book is going to change the lives of so many families and really become your quick reference guide for the toddler years.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It's for those of you who are listening and not watching, she just held up her cute book. Like the cute graphics. It's called Transforming Toddlerhood, which is your whole platform. And let's maybe start a little bit about how did you build this platform? How did you get into this work? You have become quite a voice in the world of toddlers, and I'm really excited to have you here to share your wisdom with us.
Thank you. So my story, how I got started, first I have a degree in psychology with a focus in child development. And after I graduated from college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. But I knew I wanted to move to a big city. So I moved to New York City and I was like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to be a nanny. I wanted to travel. I wanted to live in a big city. I grew up in Ohio, in the countryside. I was ready for something new. So anyways, I was a nanny for many, many years. And as a nanny for high profile families all over the world, I really got a really good firsthand education of being with so many different types of toddlerhoods and so many different family dynamics. But one thing I noticed to be true across the board is that oftentimes toddlers are trying to communicate with their parents the best way that they could through their behaviors and their tears. And parents were constantly being frustrated by these behaviors and almost misconstruing what their toddler was trying to communicate with them. So I felt like the communication was going like this and they weren't really connecting. So through that experience and through my own transformation of rewriting the script on the idea that if a toddler is having good behavior, I was doing a good job. And if they're having bad behavior, I was doing a bad job. And so once you realize that all behavior is communication, that this little being has, a very immature brain and very little life experience, that they need to learn all kinds of skills to be successful here, I realized that no one was talking about toddlerhood on Instagram. It was either pregnancy, babyhood, or, kids in general. And toddlerhood is a very challenging developmental period, but also very critical. And there's also a lot of beauty and joy in it. And so that's why I started Transforming Toddlerhood back in 2018 to really dispel the myth that toddlerhood is terrible and to support parents and really understanding toddlers and, just creating more confidence in their parenting and connection in their relationships.
I love that. And I love that, that is, I think, born out of those early years in the social media sphere of helping parents understand with developmentally appropriate information. Because I think there's a big difference. I think there's a lot of for lack of a better term, momfluencers out there that are, and many are really well intentioned. They're sharing their experience, and they're trying to be helpful. And I think there's grown out of this wave, a massive amount of overwhelming content, just overwhelming quantity of parenting content that, I'm guilty of contributing to. It's this catch-22 of I want to teach people the accurate information. And so you have to put it in these spaces, and then parents get really overwhelmed. And I think what I like about your work, what I try to do in my work, and, is give people information that's valid, developmentally, scientifically, psychologically informed, but in a way that also helps them know, this is not a one size fits all. This isn't the one way to do it. This isn't if you don't do this, you're doing it wrong. It's about individualizing and attunement and listening to you, becoming an intuitive partner with your kid. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is where what you do is pretty important. And I appreciate it.
Thank you. I really agree with this because for so many years, I've had parents every day writing in DMs or on comments of my posts oh, I'm so guilty of this, or, oh, I just want to know the right way to respond here. And I always write back, I'm you are not guilty. You are a human being who's doing the best they can in this moment. And so I'm let's just reframe this right away. And there's more than one way to handle a situation, right? There's not one right way. And that part of what I've been doing at Transforming Toddlerhood and thinking about developmentally smart parenting is the idea of getting to know your child where they are at personally, developmentally, and then looking at how you can align your parenting practices with where your child's at.
Yeah. So you talk about developmentally smart parenting. We were having this conversation before we hit record, but there's all these terms out there for what it is that we're doing and what we're not doing. And just how do you navigate that? Because I know it's hard because there's just a million terms for different types. I've never heard we're at this weird point in life where there's a lexicon of parenting styles. There's never been before.
Yes.
And I'm sure it's confusing for a lot of people because one person's talking about one thing and using the exact same name as this other person who's talking about something totally different. Someone's saying it's gentle parenting and someone's saying, no, that's permissive parenting. And someone's saying, no, that's authoritative parenting. And how do you explain this? How do you think about the way you teach parents to connect with their kids?
Yes. Well, I think that it's a really important conversation to have because it can be overwhelming because there are all of these terms and there's not necessarily definitions that are cohesive and concise that everyone agrees upon inside of these terms. And I think like the biggest challenge when you're looking at all of this is that when we say things like gentle parenting or positive parenting, oftentimes we start thinking without like really knowing the whole story is that, oh, that must mean that like my child needs to be happy or there can't be like tears or face hardship. And so I think like that's one of the biggest misconceptions with all of these terms is this idea that, oh, well, we have to make sure for my child to be emotionally healthy, we have to make sure my child's like always happy, right? And I think that that's where gentle parenting and positive parenting might get misconstrued. And so that's why I really started talking about developmentally smart parenting, because we want to align our parenting practice with the child's development. But inside of that, we know that children need limits, right? They also need someone to take their feelings, emotions, and needs into account. They also need to learn skills, but they need limits. So when we set clear, firm, yet kind limits, then what we're doing here is we're creating a container for our child to flourish inside of. But when you set a limit, your child might get upset. And I think it really comes down to like this fear of upsetting kids because we don't like to. It's hard to watch your child be upset. It's hard to listen to a tantrum. And so I think that that fear of like ruining our kids or making them upset leads to this lack of setting limits, which leads to like all of these terms getting jumbled.
Right. And I think truly when like labels of types of parenting aside, because I think the reality is parents kind of shift and kind of weave in and out of different kinds of parenting styles, right? Depending on their bandwidth.
Exactly.
Right? Like I know, and I'm going to use the terms like permissive parenting, authoritative parenting, and authoritarian parenting just to illustrate this, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all talking about.
Well, and those are the terms that have the scientific research behind them, right?
Right. They're the operationalized terms. And like I know when I'm dialing it in, which I definitely do on low bandwidth days, I might be pretty permissive. And then when I am being really permissive and I do need my kid to do something, I'll be like, no, do it. And then I flip once I hit my limit to authoritarian parenting, where I'm like, if you don't do it, there is no dessert tonight. Like, I'm taking this away. Like, I do that 100%. And I think it's human to do that. I think that it's often, for me, a sign to myself that I'm either low resourced energetically or I'm not accessing my skills. Like, because I've studied this for a long time, I have a big toolbox. Do I always have access to it? No. But for a lot of parents, it's also that there isn't toolbox. There's nothing in the toolbox other than permit until you threaten.
Right.
And I know you have lots to say on this. So can we talk a little bit about like discipline and setting limits, and what are some misconceptions that you see that parents are taking to heart and then finding themselves kind of stuck or feeling like they're not doing it right, or they feel like they're ineffective? They as a parent feel ineffective?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about these like terminologies, I have a whole chapter dedicated to our parenting role. And I've named like the authoritarian type of parenting as the controlling commander, which is on one end of the spectrum, and then the permissive style, the permissive pushover. And we're all going to be on that continuum from time to time. And our goal is to kind of jump off of that continuum to what I call the confident leader and guide, which is that authoritative type of parenting. And I think that the biggest misconception, because we've seen a lot of oftentimes the way we were raised was with a parent who falls into that more controlling commander role, which is kind of like the my way or the highway type of mentality. And so oftentimes we confuse discipline with punishment. We think that discipline is synonymous with punishments. And so because of that, we start asking ourselves, when a child has a behavior, and spoiler alert, many of the behaviors that drive us nuts during toddlerhood are actually very developmentally appropriate. It doesn't mean you have to condone them and you can't teach them better skills and you can't set limits. but they're also very typical for that age group. But oftentimes when we're faced with these types of behaviors like hitting, biting, tantrums, throwing, all the things, we ask ourselves, what punishment does my child need to learn their lesson versus what skill does my child need to be more successful here? Because a lot of the behaviors that toddlers have are them trying to get their needs met or express their feelings and emotions. Or just their lack of skills. And in the end, we don't want to punish a child for having a lack of skills. We want to work on teaching them skills so they can be successful.
Right. And the end of the day, like even the parent that's sitting there saying, what punishment do I give my child so that they learn not to do this anymore? 9 times out of 10 is coming from a place of, I just want my child to learn to be successful. And this is the framework I am aware of. It's like the limits of my awareness, right? It's not the limits of my love, compassion, desire for goodness for my kid, right? Mm-hmm. It's that I'm at my ceiling in terms of like, there's got to be something I can do in this moment that will get them to never do this again. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, just what we know about child development, what we know about brain development, we know about regulation skills, most 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds just don't have the capacity. One, they don't have the capacity to learn anything. No one, not even us, has the capacity to learn anything when we are dysregulated, because by definition, dysregulation co-occurs with the learning part of our brain, the thinking part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex being offline. So if we can't be in control of ourselves in the moment, we also cannot learn anything new. So I think parents also think that discipline, or to your point, punishment, will teach their kid, and that's the only tool I have access to in this hot, messy, awful moment. But the reality is I think we need to just take learning off the table in the hot moments. There's no teaching to be done. If you want to teach your kid to do something different next time, you got to give yourself permission to just wait, use different strategies now in the moment, and then come back and teach your kid in the not in the moment moments.
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception, right? And I think this is also where parents get really frustrated and where they're like, this just doesn't work, right? Because they're trying to teach a skill. Maybe it's a calming skill. Maybe it's like a breathing skill or something. They're trying to teach children skills in what I call the heat of the moment, right? Like when their child is completely dysregulated and then they're like, this doesn't work. It's not working. And it's like, because that's not the moment when your child actually can learn, as you were saying. And so just by shifting to this idea of teaching skills in the calm moments, practicing, strengthening those skills, as your child grows, they're going to start recalling them in the challenging moments. But the challenging moment is definitely not the place to start out. It's just going to lead to a lot more frustration for everyone in that moment.
Yeah. So what can parents do in the moment, in the heat of the moment? What are useful tools in that moment?
Yeah. Well, the things that I like to talk about in the heat of the moment start by establishing safety. And that is physical safety first. So making sure like you're safe, like your child's not like hitting you. If they are, you put them down, you get some distance between the two of you. Even if you have to put a pillow, something, but you're establishing that physical safety. Your child's not like going to roll off the couch when they're having a tantrum, going to split their head open. So you establish that physical safety. You tell yourself, this is not an emergency. I am safe. My child is safe. And then you can start working on the emotional safety piece, which is grounding yourself, maybe validating your own experience and feelings, maybe reframing, going from like putting labels on the behavior to just noticing the behavior that's happening and, really starting to calm yourself and just kind of reframe how you're looking at things. And then from there, oftentimes connection can be supportive, depends on your child and how upset they are. You need to know, is it going to be some physical connection? Do they need a hug? Do they need you nearby? Is it like emotional connection? Are you giving them some validation? Are you getting curious about what's going on for them? And then setting limits and following through on them, right? If your child's upset, it's important to continue following through on the limit. And then this is what's so hard. Sometimes less is more. Like you just have to create some space and wait. Like if you've established safety, you're grounding yourself, you've used some connection, you're upholding the limits that you set. Now we cannot force a child to accept the limit, right? Like we can't force them to accept it. And all of that crying, those big behaviors, that's them working through it to get to the point where they can accept it. And that space between them getting upset and accepting the reality can feel like 5 hours, but sometimes it's only 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And so it's hard to just sit there and hold space for that, or even to move forward with what you're doing and come back and check on your child if needed.
Yeah. I call that riding the wave. Like sometimes the only tool in our toolbox I'll talk about it in terms of like a scale, like a thermometer, right? 0 to 10, 8, 9, 10. We have very limited access to the tools. Very few tools work at this point. Like kind of just the ones I agree with all the ones that you named. And like, I really think at 10 out of 10, other than established safety, you ride the wave. You got to let it's going to peak and it's going to ebb. And I actually I think it's helpful to teach kids this in the cool moments that like these, like I have a kid who get like the space between them not accepting the limit and them accepting the limit really was sometimes 5 hours, or it was definitely like 40 minutes. Like it was not 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes if I was blessed with a good day that day, but like it could be 40 minutes for sure, more, hour and a half, which is a lot. That's a really long time for your kid to be in a acutely dysregulated state. It's a really long time as a parent to be in that state of like stress and overwhelm, probably your own fight or flight. And so I remember whenever my kid would kind of, they'd peak and they would ebb, and there'd be a moment where like it was like they switched, like they fell back into themselves. And when that would happen, you could really tell, like it was really clear, like she crossed a threshold, right? And that's when she could tolerate connection. In that heat, there was no, if I like tried to touch her, if I tried to talk to her, like it wasn't going to do anything. And like, but once she came back into herself and could tolerate connection, one of the first things I would always say is like, oh, that feeling came and it went. You're okay. We're here. It's done. I think that's the teaching piece is like, and for us as parents and for the kids to understand like these things, they come in a wave, they peak and then they ebb. They don't stay forever.
I totally agree. This is why I created what I call the recipe for effective discipline, that it's creating connection, setting limits and following through, and teaching skills. That's the recipe. And just like when you're baking, like say you're baking a cupcake or something, if we only focus on limits, then we're really going into that authoritarian parenting role and the controlling commander. And, it's challenging because we're not leaving the space for teaching the skills, which I love that example, right? Because teaching skills, we think it could sound daunting maybe, but it can be very simple. Like that phrase you said is very simple, like teaching a child that feelings are not facts. They're just like the weather, they come and go, like, oh, like you felt that feeling and now it's gone. Like that's an amazing learning skill for a child to learn. And so it doesn't have to be overly complicated, but that's why I like having all three of those be present. And that's how you bake the cupcake.
Yeah, I like that. I think, and so you talk too about like power structure. Cause I feel like, okay.
Yes.
Tolerating our kids' big dysregulated emotions or dysregulated behaviors, like that's a skill in and of itself, just to understand like, okay, this is developmentally appropriate. I can only do what I can do. And I'm not going to try to do something I can't do in this moment, right? There's a lot of like radical acceptance and understanding developmental, like having developmentally realistic expectations of our kid. And then that kind of plays out in how we discipline or set limits, how we tolerate their dysregulation. I think an area that is so tricky for parents is this sort of power struggle, getting kids to cooperate, getting kids to do the thing we need them to do, because like that can be so interruptive to like the flow of life. And like, I don't know, I'm sure you get it all the time, but like parents, like sometimes I just need to move them through the day. Like we have to do something. I can't just sit for 4 hours as they melt it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so uncomfortable because it's kind of that in-between space, which I call the nagging negotiator. So in between the controlling commander and the permissive pushover, and that in-between space is the nagging negotiator where the parent and the child are like vying for control here, right? And that's what a power struggle is. And when we get sucked into that power struggle, you just really feel this, you feel this sense of urgency, right? To like win, because we go into our stress response too. So, right, we're like pushing against our child, but the problem is our toddlers don't have the brain maturation to step out of a power struggle. Like they're wired to be in a power struggle because they're trying to show they're their own independent person and no longer an extension of you. But when we get sucked into that emotional roller coaster with them and we're locked in that power struggle, we have to remember that it takes two people to be in a power struggle. And if you're waiting for your child to drop out of that power struggle and be like, oh, okay, just kidding, you can be there for a long time. So, but on the other hand, you don't want to just drop out and be like, fine, do whatever you want. I can't, because that's where we're back in the permissive place. So what I feel like is really the key is just first remembering, okay, there's nothing to win here because in parenting, you're not trying to like win over your child, right? And that it takes two people to be in a power struggle. So how do you step back in an empowered way? And so that might look like, say that it's your toddler like doesn't want to get dressed, right? And so it might look like saying something like, here are your clothes. I'm going to go start breakfast and you can come down when you get dressed, or you can come to the kitchen when you get dressed, or something like this. So you're still upholding the limit of what you're trying to do, but you're also stepping out of it. And then your toddler is probably going to follow you because they don't like being away from you as much as they want to push against you, but then they want to be right with you. They have all these competing needs. And then that's when, you grab it, and then you might, the clothes, and you might be like, oh, do you want to put on your pants or do you want to put on your shirt first? And like maybe give them a choice within your boundaries. There's a lot of different tools that you can use, when and then choices, things like this, to start moving through the power struggle and getting to the other side. But oftentimes it requires us as the adult to cognitively decide we're going to move forward instead of just sitting there waiting on your child to make the choice to move forward. You're going to be waiting a long time.
Yeah. I think that's like such an important point. Like, and this I think maps very nicely onto your idea of like developmentally smart parenting, being like aware of where your child is in development. Like a 2 or 3-year-old, they have unlimited stamina to hold that rope,
yes,
but they don't have the capacity to put the rope down.
Yes.
So it's like, which kid do you want to like who are you working with, right? You aren't going to win if your goal is to get them to put the rope down first. So the negotiating and the coercing and the, it doesn't work. Not picking up the rope, which feels so antithetical to all the things we've been like taught explicitly and intrinsically as parents, of like, you are responsible for getting your kid to do things and you don't want to give up your authority and you don't want to undermine your authority, and then they're going to rule the roost. And like, once you set a limit, you can never unset that limit because then you're backing down. And I'm like, there are so many ways to put down the rope without damaging your child's respect for your authority.
I couldn't agree more, but the challenge is it takes so much self-control to like put down that rope, which is also why it's almost like comical when we're not in the middle of a stress response that we would expect a toddler to have this ability with their immature brains, when it's literally so hard for us to like have that amount of self-control to, put down the rope, because it's really, really hard. And that's why, coming back to this idea of establishing the physical and emotional safety, I just feel like is so important. important because when we start disrupting our stress response and giving ourselves a little bit of time before we respond, it gets to be easier to put down that rope with practice.
Which actually makes me think of another important little piece for the power struggle thing is like take the clothing, toddler getting dressed in the morning example. In a really nice scenario, you say, all right, I'm going to go downstairs and you can come when you're ready. And then they follow you and you say, all right, I got the clothes. Which one do you want to do? Pants or shirt? And they're like, pants. Because now I'm just focused on, because you got them to drop the rope basically by pivoting. However, there's a lot of scenarios where they still haven't dropped the rope. Like they didn't drop it that fast. And I think you have to give yourself a lot of permission. This is where that urgency thing you were talking about comes in. Like you have to stop buying into that like little voice in our head that's saying there's urgency, like get them to drop the rope quickly. It's like, it's also totally okay to say, I'm going to go downstairs and get breakfast. Come down when you're ready. And then when they follow you with no clothes and you don't say anything because you know they're still holding onto that rope, but you can just feel their yuck. And so you just grab the clothes. You don't say anything. You just go down to the kitchen and you don't even talk about the clothes for a little while. Like there's no rush. I mean, let's be honest. I live in a house where there's always a rush in the morning, but I don't mean sometimes there's like a chronological rush, but there isn't a parenting rush, like the urgency piece. Like you're not failing if you don't get this right. You're not failing if you put them in the car in their pajamas either.
10,000%.
But like, yeah. And this I think goes to your point of like, you need to be paying attention to your kid and where they are at, because you might have a kid who can drop the rope just because you walked out of the room and they like got distracted by that and was like, no, I just really want to be with you. I'll put on the clothes. Which is fine. You might also have a kid who's got who holds that rope for a really long time. And you have to be okay with saying like, let's go have breakfast. Let's fill up your belly. Let's have some fun. I'm going to help us pivot out of this space of holding ropes. And then when they're got a little food in their stomach, they've had a little break and some space from this rope pulling moment with you, and their body's in a different place. I think getting them to move into clothing is so much different at that point. So it's like, it's also okay if it takes a really long time till you revisit the thing that initially provoked the power struggle. Devon and I have been talking a lot about power struggles, and you'll hear us dive even deeper into that in just a minute. But I wanted to pop in quickly to tell you about a free resource that I created that I think you're really going to love if this conversation is resonating with you. It's a 60-minute on-demand video workshop called From Battles to Bonding, Overcoming Power Struggles. In it, I'll help you understand why the strategies you've been using to avoid or win a power struggle often backfire, and why they probably always will. You will learn what actually causes power struggles, how to break out of that frustrating cycle, and how to map out your child's challenging behaviors so you can start building a personalized toolbox of strategies that really fit your child and your family. This is not about quick fixes or winning the battle. It's about creating more cooperation, connection, and confidence in your parenting relationship with your kid. You can get instant access to this free workshop right now by clicking the link in the episode description or by heading to drsarahbrunn.com/power struggles. Okay, now let's get back to my conversation with Devon.
It just brings me to the idea of like why the connection piece is so important, because one way to create connection is through curiosity. And even within ourselves, we don't even have to say anything out loud. We can just actually just get curious in our own heads about what's happening here, right? Because if we know that behavior is communication and it's communicating, your child's feelings and emotions, their level of brain maturation, what's happening with their sensory system, their basic needs like hunger, tiredness, need for connection, their developmental needs like having a sense of control, feeling capable, all of these things. When you start getting curious, okay, well, what's the real thing this behavior is trying to tell me? Then we can start. And so in that time where you're talking about like not bringing it back up, it's a great time to get curious, because then you can actually start addressing some of those things that might have caused the power struggle in the first place. Are they like do they not want to get dressed because they don't want to separate because you're going to work or they're going to like preschool or something like that? Are they actually really hungry and your child truly just needs to eat food before they can like put on clothes and cooperate in that way? You get to think about, okay, what is this behavior really trying to tell you? Because your toddler is not doing this to be bad, to make you mad, to make you late, to make your life difficult. So the sooner you realize that and start getting curious, that's where the true transformation happens for both yourself and your kid.
Yeah. And because I was thinking, I was like, what was my kid's reason? And like, it could be so.
It could change by the day,
Totally. When I got curious about why my kids weren't putting their clothes on in the morning, actually both of them, it was both very, I mean, obviously some days it was different reasons. Some days it was because they were just in a grumpy mood. But they also hated putting on, they're both super sensitive to like sheets or clothes feeling cold on their skin.
Yeah. I was just thinking the sensory
taking their
system.
warm jammies off and slipping into like the cold cotton pants or whatever.
Right.
And so when I got them to go in the kitchen and like eat breakfast and move around and warm up a little bit, and then they were like, I don't want this hot pajama on. And then they were more open to like putting on their clothes. Life got easier when it came to power struggles around getting dressed. So it's like sometimes it's not what you think. Sometimes it's just really like kind of looking at it through your kid's eyes.
Yeah, maybe it's about a sense of control. Like that's another great one. So maybe it's like your child really just needs to have a feeling like they have a say in their morning. So maybe it's them choosing like the order of what's happening. Maybe they're choosing to get dressed before breakfast or after breakfast. Maybe after breakfast is better because now you don't have to do a second change because they got breakfast all over them. My husband and I constantly debate if we should, dress our kid before or after breakfast.
Yes. There's some practicality there too.
Yeah.
But I'm like, we're allowed as parents to work with our kids to do things unconventional order, like do things in unconventional orders. Like, I just think sometimes there's a picking of your battles that needs to happen that like, I just want all parents to feel empowered to be like, I'm picking my battle. And then also I'm going to change my mind in the moment. And can you talk about that? Because I think I find that parents sometimes feel like they've painted themselves into a corner because they said you have to do this. And then now they're like, how do I disengage from the power struggle without like screwing myself later? And I think that's a myth we're telling ourselves. Like, I really don't believe that that's true, but
yeah. I mean, definitely. Okay. So first of all, I think it comes down to consistency. So oftentimes we think consistency means, right, we do something the same way all the time. Perfection because we're always in this all or nothing mentality, right? But I like to define consistency as more often than not, but it's predictable that we're going to do X, Y, Z. Okay, so now we like apply it to a situation where we said something and then we need to go back on it. If you're not constantly backpedaling once or twice randomly is not going to change the state of the world because you are showing up consistently, predictably in a certain way, and that's what has been established with your child. However, if you're backpedaling every time your child grumps at you, it's not quite a tantrum, but they're like grumping at you or, starting to whine, cry a little bit like that, then if you're consistently giving in more often than not, then that's where the challenge comes in. So it's really about looking at, okay, where are you creating consistency?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think the consistency piece, the permission to say like, I'm trying to think of an example of where this comes up a lot. Because what I will also tell parents to do is like, look at the moments that you are having power struggles, like map them out. Like I'll actually have parents like track for a week.
Yep.
And like invariably there are patterns, right? And they're unique to each family system, right? But like, is it always at nighttime? Is it always in the morning? Or is it always like around a transition? Or is it around switching from a preferred activity to a less preferred activity? Or is it just because you said so? Like it's it's the defiance piece. Like I just need to say no to anything you say to me because I need to feel powerful. And is it around siblings? Is it around mom? Is it around dad or whatever? Like look for the patterns. And then like pick one pattern that you're recognizing to address so that you have the bandwidth as the parent to say, I'm going to set this limit. I'm going to hold this limit very consistently for a little while and if I'm trying to hold every limit across all these different patterns and domains and whatever, I'm going to do it for like a day or two until I burn out. And then I'm going to stop doing all of them. So it's like, no, you pick one, you hold that limit, you hold it no matter how much your child loses their absolute mind at you because you held it until that sort of slows and they kind of, that acceptance piece comes in and they could be acceptance over days, till they are like, all right, she's not going to budge on this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
It really comes back to like this. I mean, I guess like the biggest thing, it comes down to this parenting mindset, right? Because I think everything we keep talking about is really the detriment of looking at things through an all or nothing lens, right? Because as in your example, like whenever you're trying to hold all the limits everywhere, especially if you haven't been holding a ton of limits, you're going to burn out, right? But then if we burn out, then we're like, well, give up on that. So now we're back into the nothing. And so I think a lot of the struggle that we face as parents is really disrupting that cycle of swaying back and forth between this all or nothing mentality, which is also the same pendulum as like the controlling commander and the permissive pushover, right? It's like all control or no control, right? And so I think like that's really one of the biggest challenges that we face as parents and caregivers. Just seems like a theme of this conversation.
Totally. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, we could get into how that even exists, but I feel like we are parenting in a world that still has deep roots, intergenerational roots in like very authoritarian approaches to child rearing and like very like puritanical, like very rigid all or nothing ways of being that we've I think almost all of our society has agreed to have moved beyond. And yet we hold it inside of us from the generational like transmission of these things. So it's like, it's complicated, but I also don't want parents to think that like it's not changeable, but I also want them to understand like why it's so triggering. We really think deep in our being that we're failing if our kids are not well behaved. And the reality is like regulating behavior is a very sophisticated cognitive capacity that just doesn't happen in early childhood, at least not consistently and reliably.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Our kids are the opposite of that, consistency and predictability, right? That we were just talking about. It's so true. And that's why I spend a really big part of my book. I mean, I have one whole section of my book called The Toddler Explained, where I talk about, what are realistic expectations? How do you decode behavior? What's happening in the brain? What's happening in the sensory system? What the heck is discipline in light of all of this? And then how do we create that developmentally smart discipline? What are those components? And it's so important to recalibrate ourselves in that area. And there's a lot of different aspects that go into it. And I talk about all of that before I talk about any of the specific challenges, like tantrums and whining and screen time and separation anxiety and bath time and, all the things that, happen in toddlerhood. And so I just want parents to know that we're doing really important work and we're doing work that's challenging and takes a lot of effort. So just go easy on yourself and give yourself the benefit of the doubt, give your child the benefit of the doubt, because you're a human being. And so is your child. And there's just going to be ups and downs. And that doesn't mean anything about you or your child. Yeah.
And then I think the beneficial fallout of moving into that headspace is that you aren't parenting from a place of threat. Like, if you really do believe and come to feel in your body that like, I've got this, my kids got this, these behaviors aren't a referendum on who I am, who they are, or what our relationship is, then all of a sudden, like everything feels a little bit less terrifying. Like the stakes feel lower. And it's like, which also calms us down. And so we have more emotional bandwidth in the moment to like sit in this wake of lava spewing in their volcanic eruption, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I always tell parents, like, don't dissect lava. Don't like if they say they hate you or get away from me, or I'm not inviting you to my birthday party, or like all the things, or, don't pick up those words and respond to them as anything other than lava. Like, oh, you're just feeling so much right now. I think parents, it's when you have that experience of sitting in front of your child who is absolutely erupting and you don't have a fight or flight response, or maybe just like a low level, like this is really physiologically very overstimulating, but like I'm not registering this as danger. That's a threshold you cross as a parent that like changes the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like with that, establishing the physical safety, that's why it's so important to say this is not an emergency, because you've actually checked, and then you can kind of like tell your brain that's perceiving these threats. It's like, wait, I'm perceiving a threat, but there's actually not a real threat here. And so every time you start feeling that like overwhelming urge of urgency, what it is, it's a clue to the fact that you're actually just in a stress response. And that's actually the time to, drop the rope, not take action, to, really turn within. And that urgency sure is a trickster that's trying to trip us up there.
Yeah. 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 It's evolutionarily based, right? It's trying to help us.
It's our brain
trying to keep
response.
us safe and alive, but it's not accurate all the time. Right?
But that's what we're up against. And that's why it's so hard, because we're literally up against like ingrained automatic evolutionary responses that we have to like really work through and, work on rewiring how we respond. And that is something that takes time. So having realistic expectations for yourself too, as a parent and caregiver, is just as important as having those realistic expectations for your toddler.
Yeah. We're all humans.
True.
The little ones and the big ones.
All of us.
I know. If people want to like get your book, find you, follow your work, where should we link to in our show notes?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my new book is available on Amazon, or you can go to transformingtoddlerhood.com/book. And you can find it also at all major retailers. And everything for me is Transforming Toddlerhood. So you can find me on Instagram, find my website, and I love connecting with everyone.
Thank you so much, Devon. This was like a really fun conversation.
Thank you. I really loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts and your feedback with me by scrolling down to the ratings and review section on your Apple Podcast app or whatever app you're listening on, and let me know what you think of this episode or the show in general. Your support means the absolute world to me. And just a simple tap of 5 stars can make a real impact in how this show gets reached by parents everywhere. So thank you so much for listening, and don't be a stranger.